The special relationship, modern UK and US relations. The Atlantic Ocean is a vast and restless expanse, 3,000 miles of salt and deep water currents that have for centuries both separated and joined two distinct nations. It is often described as a bridge, a stretch of blue that carries not just ships and cables, but the weight of a shared history. When we speak of the special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States, we are speaking of a bond that is rarely found in the cold, transactional world of international diplomacy. It is a relationship of sentiment and shared blood, of quiet intelligence and loud disagreements, a connection that has survived the rise and fall of empires and the shifting tides of the modern age. The term itself, the special relationship, was famously brought into the public consciousness by Winston Churchill in 1946 during his speech in Fulton, Missouri. Standing in the heart of America, with the echoes of the Second World War still ringing in the ears of the world, he spoke of a fraternal association of the English-speaking peoples. He envisioned a world where the British Empire and the United States stood together, not just as allies in war, but as guardians of a certain way of life. Yet, while Churchill gave the bond a name, the roots of this connection were planted long before, in the soil of a more turbulent era. To understand the depth of this partnership, one must look back to a time when the relationship was defined not by cooperation, but by conflict. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the two nations were bitter rivals. The American Revolution had severed the colonial ties, and the War of 1812 had seen British forces burn the White House. For decades, the young republic across the sea viewed the British Empire with a mixture of suspicion and defiance. But as the 19th century drew to a close, a subtle shift began to occur. This period, known as the Great Rapprochement, saw the two nations begin to align their interests. The British, managing a sprawling and increasingly overstretched empire, realized that a friendly, stable United States was a far greater asset than a hostile one. Similarly, American leaders began to see that the British Royal Navy provided a shield of stability that allowed American commerce to flourish. By the time the 20th century dawned, the frost had begun to melt. The shared language and legal traditions, once the source of friction, became the foundation for a new kind of understanding. This transition was not immediate. It was a slow, deliberate movement, like the turning of a great ship. It was during the First World War that the first true test of this burgeoning alliance arrived. While the United States remained neutral for much of the conflict, the economic and cultural ties to Britain were already too deep to ignore. When American troops finally arrived on the Western Front in 1917, they brought with them a sense of shared purpose that would forever change the global balance of power. The true crucible of the relationship, however, was the Second World War. It was here that the partnership moved from the theoretical to the existential. The personal chemistry between Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt is often cited as the catalyst for this era, and indeed, their correspondence, thousands of letters and telegrams, reveals a level of intimacy and trust that is perhaps unique among world leaders. They met in secret off the coast of Newfoundland in 1941 to draft the Atlantic Charter, a document that outlined their vision for a post-war world based on democracy and free trade. Behind the grand speeches and public handshakes, the technical and granular reality of the relationship was being forged in the heat of necessity. The Destroyers for Bases deal of 1940, where the US provided 50 aging destroyers in exchange for 99-year leases on British naval bases in the Western Hemisphere, was a pragmatic, even desperate exchange. It was followed by the Lend-Lease Act, a massive undertaking that saw a steady stream of American supplies, tanks, planes, and food flowing across the Atlantic to keep a besieged Britain alive. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the war was the birth of the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Agreement. It began with the Brewster Agreement in 1943, a secret pact to share signals intelligence gathered from the breaking of German and Japanese codes. This cooperation at Bletchley Park and in the intelligence offices of Washington created a level of integration that has never been unpicked. Even today, the intelligence agencies of the two nations, the GCHQ and the NSA, operate with a level of transparency with one another that they afford no other ally. It is the quiet, invisible backbone of the special relationship, a silent conversation that has never stopped. As the fires of the Second World War faded, the world entered the long, tense twilight of the Cold War. It was during this period that the relationship faced its most complex challenges. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Britain was no longer the world's banker, but its debtor, while the United States had emerged as a global superpower. This change was felt most acutely in the realm of nuclear technology. In 1946, the US Congress passed the McMahon Act, which abruptly cut off the sharing of atomic information with all foreign nations, including Britain. To the British, who had contributed significantly to the Manhattan Project, this felt like a betrayal. It took years of quiet diplomacy and the demonstration of Britain's own independent nuclear capability for the relationship to be restored through the 1958 Mutual Defense Agreement. This agreement remains the most intimate nuclear partnership in the world, allowing the UK to purchase American delivery systems like the Polaris and later Trident missiles while maintaining its own warheads. Yet for all the technical cooperation, the political reality was often fraught. The Suez Crisis of 1956 remains the most painful example of this friction. When Britain, along with France and Israel, invaded Egypt to regain control of the Suez Canal, President Dwight D. Eisenhower was furious. He feared the intervention would drive the Arab world into the arms of the Soviet Union. The United States exerted immense economic pressure on the British pound, forcing a humiliating withdrawal. It was a stark, cold reminder that in this special relationship, one partner held the purse strings. For Britain, it was a moment of national reckoning, a realization that it could no longer act as an independent great power without American support. The decades that followed saw the relationship ebb and flow with the personalities of the leaders in London and Washington. There was the warm, ideological kinship between Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. They shared a worldview of free markets and a firm stance against the Soviet Union. Thatcher once remarked that Reagan was the second most important man in her life. Yet, even they had their moments of tension, such as when the US invaded Grenada, a member of the Commonwealth, without informing London until the last moment. In the early 21st century, the relationship was defined by the controversial partnership between Tony Blair and George W. Bush. Blair's decision to commit British troops to the invasion of Iraq in 2003 was seen by many in the UK as a sign that the relationship had become too one-sided. The British public's perception of the alliance began to shift. The term poodle was often used to describe the Prime Minister's perceived subservience to the White House. While the political and military elites remained deeply integrated, the public in the UK grew increasingly skeptical of the price of the special relationship. This brings us to the fascinating divergence in how the relationship is viewed on either side of the Atlantic. In the United Kingdom, the special relationship is a subject of constant national debate. It is analysed, fretted over, and treated as a barometer of the country's global standing. Every British Prime Minister is judged on how quickly they receive a phone call from a newly inaugurated American president. There is a sense of unrequited love, a worry that the UK values the connection far more than the US does. In the United States, the perspective is often more transactional and varied. For many American policymakers, the UK is seen as a uniquely capable and reliable partner, but it is one of several important alliances. The US looks to the Pacific, to the Middle East, and to the rest of Europe, and the special relationship is often viewed through the lens of what it can contribute to these broader strategic goals. While the American public generally holds a warm and positive view of the British, fueled by shared culture and a fascination with the monarchy, the intricate nuances of the diplomatic specialness rarely capture the American imagination in the same way they do in Britain. In the mid-2000s, the relationship entered a new and complex chapter. The post-Brexit landscape forced the United Kingdom to seek new economic and security frameworks, making the bond with the United States even more vital, yet more difficult to navigate. The emergence of the AUKUS Pact, a trilateral security partnership between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, has become a cornerstone of this new era. It is a massive, multi-generational project focused on the Indo-Pacific, involving the sharing of highly sensitive nuclear-powered submarine technology. Under the current leadership of Prime Minister Keir Starmer and President Donald Trump, who returned to the White House in early 2025, the relationship is being tested by the pragmatic realities of a changing world order. As of early 2026, the primary focus of the partnership has shifted toward economic security and technological sovereignty. The Economic Prosperity Deal, EPD, signed in May 2025, was intended to be a landmark agreement, reducing barriers in sectors like aerospace, pharmaceuticals, and green energy. However, the path has not been without its obstacles. In February 2026, the relationship faced a significant moment of tension regarding global trade. President Trump, following through on campaign promises, had introduced a series of wide-ranging tariffs on imports to the United States. These measures, aimed at reducing the US trade deficit, hit British exporters particularly hard, especially in the automotive and steel industries. A recent ruling by the United States Supreme Court on February 20, 2026, declared that some of these tariffs, imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, were an overreach of executive authority. However, in a swift response, the US administration immediately signed a new executive order to maintain a 15% global tariff using alternative legal justifications. In London, the government has responded with a mixture of calm diplomacy and strategic recalibration. Prime Minister Starmer, speaking at the Munich Security Conference on February 14, 2026, outlined a vision that signals a subtle but important shift in British foreign policy. He spoke of the need for Europe to move away from over-dependence on the United States and toward a state of interdependence. While reaffirming that the US remains an indispensable ally, he argued that the UK's future security and prosperity must be more deeply integrated with its European neighbours to create a more European NATO. This call for greater European autonomy is a direct response to the America First posture of the current US administration, suggesting that the UK is looking to balance its special relationship with a more robust role in European defence. On the ground, the military and technical integration continues with a steady rhythm. The Royal Navy has recently committed to a continuous build model for its nuclear-powered attack submarines, a drumbeat of production that will see a new AUKUS-class vessel launched every 18 months well into the 2040s. This project, which blends British hull design with American combat systems, ensures that the two navies will remain operationally entwined for decades to come. There are also localized points of friction that reveal the complexities of modern sovereignty. The ongoing dispute over the Chagos Archipelago, where the UK has agreed to transfer sovereignty to Mauritius while maintaining a 99-year lease on the vital US-UK military base at Diego Garcia, remains a topic of discussion in Washington. President Trump has expressed concerns that the deal could eventually allow for Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean, despite the long-term lease. The British government continues to maintain that the agreement is the only way to secure the legal future of the base. The special relationship is not a static monument, but a living, breathing entity. It is a tapestry woven from the threads of millions of individual connections. The scientists working on joint AI projects, the intelligence officers sharing data in windowless rooms, and the families who have ties on both sides of the Atlantic. It is a relationship that has often been declared dead, only to be revived by a new crisis or a new shared goal. As we look toward the remainder of 2026, the story continues to unfold. High-level talks are currently ongoing in Washington and London to navigate the latest tariff hurdles and to ensure that the Tech Prosperity Deal, which focuses on AI and quantum computing, remains on track. The bond is being recalibrated for a world where power is more fragmented and the old certainties are being questioned. It remains a partnership defined by a unique paradox. It is a relationship of equals in spirit and history, but one of asymmetry in power and scale. And yet, for all its challenges, the bridge across the Atlantic remains, as it has been for over a century, the most significant crossing in the world.